That's the way it usually
So
goes.
we were gonna.
Yes.
Okay.
Hit your right.
Is everybody in here?
You were gonna what?
Hit your right.
Oh, good. But
Thank
you
y'all
better get your seat
so
on.
much for coming today on behalf of the Hopkins County Genealogical Society. This is one of our annual events that we've been doing several years, and we really enjoy it, and we are glad, and we're glad the weather has cooperated once again. I did 2 walks yesterday, and we hadn't had rain for so long that I wasn't worried about rain, and then all of a sudden I saw all this rain they were talking about. But I was able to do my 2 walks, and then we were able to do our cemetery walk today, so that's good. You're in the Myra Wilson Chapel. The Myra Wilson Chapel is 101 years old. There's a cornerstone out there. It was built to be a funeral rest for people that were coming. It's kind of early in that time. The funeral homes really didn't participate that much in having their own chapels, so this was an additional place that you could come and have a funeral, as opposed sometimes to the church. And a lot of people would, that were maybe out of town that were bringing their loved ones back, would use the chapel. And then when the funeral homes started having their chapels and built, the Myra Wilson kind of went away. It was not being used anymore, and it was closed up, and it was used as the maintenance shed for our caretaker. And luckily, even though in that state, and these windows were covered, and in the 1980s, the Ladies Cemetery Society decided to restore the chapel. And so we are very pleased that they chose to do this, and Myra Wilson is being used again by families, and it is a wonderful piece of our history. A little bit about the cemetery, and then what we're going to do is after I get through, we're going to walk outside, and since there's nearly 30 of y'all, we're going to divide you in 2 groups of about 14 or 15, and we have 6 portrayals, and so we're going to start you on either end. But with 6, it should move fairly quick. But of course, we want to let our actors tell you their stories. But the cemetery was founded by Dr. C.M. Houston. And you heard me correctly. I'm not mispronouncing his name, even though it was spelled Houston. He didn't like a fellow contemporary that was of the same era, Sam Houston, so he chose to pronounce his name Houston instead of Houston. And he built he bought 320 acres of this, including the area where the cemetery now stays in 1852. There's various theories about whether there might have been a grave here before. The earliest marked grave was 1849, that is going to be very near to where you see one of the portrayals. I firmly believe that grave was moved back in here at a later time and marked. I don't think it was actually buried here in 1849, but definitely in the 1850s there were burials in this cemetery. So this cemetery is easily going about 175 years old now. So that's hard to believe, but it is true. But Dr. Houston, in 1867 or 8, he donated 4 acres to the city of Sulphur Springs to continue the cemetery. People were burying out here anyway, and he decided that he needed to act forth, and so he donated 4 acres. He also sold an acre to the African American citizens that is in behind this, and then he plotted his land all the way down to the railroad track. And that is now what we know as Sunset South and Sunset North. But it was originally called the Houston Cemetery, and they would sell individual lots. But as time passed and Dr. Houston died and his heirs sold more lots, in 1887, the Ladies Cemetery Society was formed to help take care of the cemetery. It was kind of in disarray, and the ladies of the community wanted to step forward and preserve our burial ground. So the Ladies Cemetery Society has been in existence since 1887. It's kind of gone through some modifications. They've allowed a few men in. There also is, of course, there are men that are trustees, but it's still a very active group. And they have done a lot of good for this cemetery, added and bought more additions. All this in the front had been purchased at different times of different years into making our cemetery what it is presently today. So we appreciate you being here. The Genealogical Society appreciates your support. We're a nonprofit. We have been going since about 1980, so we're really proud. As with a lot of things and a lot of organizations and clubs that have gone through change, and when COVID happened and all those things, we have been very fortunate to maintain a good organization. We have a library that's in the front of the public library. We have wonderful volunteers. We have about 180 members currently. Those are not all local members, because with genealogy, a lot of people that are doing research that have connections back to Hopkins County join our society so that they have the resources that we provide for them to further their family research. So we're really fortunate. But this is one of our fundraisers for the year, because we always put our money back in the library by purchasing more material, by purchasing books. Even though we're Hopkins County, our library is much more extensive than that. You can go in there and do research. We have a very strong collection for the South, but we have some things from all over the United States. It is perfectly free. You do not have to be a member of the society to come in there and do research. All you have to do, if you make copies, you pay for your copies. But we always would enjoy you supporting our society and joining our membership. Okay, we're going to step outside and we'll divide y'all as close as we can into two groups. I forgot to mention today, one reason why we play taps is all the portrayals, since we're so close to Veterans Day, all the portrayals are either of veterans or of veterans' wives. So everyone you see today has some connection to one of the wars that the United States has been involved in. I'm gonna have one group, and I am gonna have the golf cart. So if you think you need the golf cart, make sure you go with me, and then oh, you're going to have the other group, so. Why don't we just, let me see, y'all are kind of halfway divided here. Okay.
Well, hello everybody. This is a grave here that was buried here 70 years ago, and it's marked known only to God. On the evening of August the 10th, 1954, there was a young man hitchhiking from Dallas, and a good Samaritan stopped and offered him a ride. And he asked him where he was going. He said, I'm going to Texarkana to see my sisters, my little sisters. And the gentleman told him, he said, I can give you a ride as far as I'm going to Arthur City. And he said, I can take you that far. And he was in a brand new car, it was just a month old. And he never asked the hitchhiker his name. Well, he gave him directions. He was kind of getting sleepy. And he gave him directions of where to go. He wanted to change places with him. He said, can you drive? And he said, yes, I can drive. And he said, I'm kind of tired. I'm going to get in the back seat and lay down. Well, when he gave him directions, you can see he took the wrong route. He then came down to into Sulphur Springs where he wasn't supposed to be coming. He got misguided around Commerce or somewhere. And they ended up driving down Highway 19 now, which is 19. And story has it that the hitchhiker must have fallen asleep. And he went off that White Oak Creek Bottom Bridge with such a force that he knocked down all the cement pillars in that on that bridge, in that banister. And because the Good Samaritan never asked his name, the only thing they found on this hitchhiker was a pack of cool cigarettes, a cigarette lighter, a key, and a dime. They had no idea who he was. The funeral home kept his body for about 10 days, trying to get people all over town to come look at him and see if they knew him. Nobody knew him. And so there was the Good Samaritan. He was alive. And he had been critically injured. And his name was Mac Wilbur Davidson. Turned out he was a World War II veteran. He went to Memorial Hospital where he was in a coma for several days. When they found out he was military, they ended up moving him to McKinney, Texas, to the Veterans Hospital. And after he got well, he just assumed his life, there around Dallas and Arthur City, where his family was from. And during World War II, until 1976, these little mini packs of cigarettes from cigarette makers, they would send you little packs with like Old Gold, Lucky Strike, Pall Malls, cool cigarettes, and waterproof matches, That's how they gave stuff to the soldiers and helped, build their brands using the soldiers and stuff. I'm going to take this down for a second so I can lay my hand down here. Well, moving on 67 years, it turns out there was 3 years of research by a volunteer at the Hopkins County Genealogical Society who got interested and started with a team of members there and volunteers and our presidents of the library asking about finding out who this man was. And they found all of his siblings. They found out who he was. They did a bio on everyone in the family. And a book was written. So, hello, I'm Kay Crowley. I'm his youngest sister. The lady from the library called me and she said, I got your name and number from your brother in Tennessee, and I would like to talk to you about your brother. She said, I have some brothers. And she said, I want to talk to you about your brother that's been missing. And she said, oh my God, did you find him? And the lady said, yes, he's been buried at the city cemetery for 7 years. And, 64 at the time. And as a sister, you're always excited to find out that your brother's alive and they know where he's at. Well, then you have to hear the sad part. He's dead. He's been buried there, all that long. So, it's horrible and it breaks your heart. But these are all of the siblings. Of course, all of them went to orphanages. The sheriff took me, my brother, and another brother, and because we were the youngest, they took us to the sheriff took us in, and he found us homes through the newspaper. The others were taken to Buckner's orphanage in Dallas, and our parents had died from TB, and so all of his original death certificates and everything says unknown. And to get a death certificate that all says unknown, you have to have, it's just a really great, important document to have in order to file for military records and get that information. You know, was he in the military? And he was in the military. They found out he was a World War II veteran also. And a little bit of good news, his records survived the 1973 fire that destroyed millions of official records, personnel, military files in St. Louis National Personnel Records Company, or the center. This is my brother. His name is John Everett Finney. His nickname was Son, and that's all I knew him by. And he was buried here as an unknown. And they made that little headstone. They have the month on it. It says July, but it was August the 20th when they put him here. And it was inscribed not only to God. And it's 64 years after his death and several years of research, John now has a military headstone. And this is his stone. And it's right here. That's great. He was sent this from President Trump, or we were sent this, not him, but he was. And this is Kay and Clyde, the youngest two that I'm representing today. And we would just like to thank you for coming out and supporting our veterans.
Thank you so much.
Am I going?
We have a book that is written. Let me show it to you. I'm Rhonda. I'm the author of the book. You can buy these for $20. We have some here on the desk up front, and then we have them at the library if anybody's interested. It's full of pictures. It's a biography on each one of them. Their whole family tree has been done on Ancestry, so you can just find 6 or 7 generations back on this family. But thanks for coming. And you're going to go to
Thank you.
Oh, her.
5.
Okay. All right. Just go right.
About him in just a second, but I just want to tell you how much I appreciate you stopping. The veterans seem to be forgotten these days, and so I don't get very many visitors. And so this warms my heart that you all have stopped at the grave of a veteran. This is my husband, Robert Henry Cumbie. He was born on August 24th of 1825, and he was born to Morgan and Lavisi, Morgan Cumbie and Lavisi Tanner. His birthplace was in Charlotte County in Virginia. In 1836, he moved with his family to Lafayette County in Mississippi. It was there that I met Robert, and that was there that Robert and I got married. Robert and I had 3 children together, 2 daughters and 1 son. Our daughters were Adriana Elizabeth and Destimota, and then our son was Robert Jr., of course. In 1849, we moved to Rusk County, Texas. Robert became a very prominent planter, one of the wealthiest men in the county. Now don't get me wrong, his wealth didn't come easy. He worked for it, but he was one of the wealthiest. In 1860, we owned $22,000 and $600 in land and $38,000 in personal property, including 30 slaves. that might seem like a lot, but there were others that had more. But we treated our slaves well, we respected each other, and they worked well for us. In fact, I want to show you a picture of one of our slaves. This is Abilene Green Cumbie. And I'm going to pass this around so that you can see him. I know sometimes it's hard to see from a distance. But Abilene took our last name of Cumbie, so he was Abilene Green Cumbie. Now, it wasn't uncommon for slaves to take the last name of their masters. Many of our slaves did not have relatives. They didn't have anyone else there that could give them a last name, so they would typically take the last name of their masters. But Robert and I were especially pleased that he chose to take our last name. We were very honored with that. So he was with us till about 14, and that's when the Civil War ended and he was freed, but he chose to stay with us 4 more years. And after that, he picked up and he moved to Tyler, got married, and established a residence in Tyler, Texas. So, Robert was elected to the 8th Texas legislature in 1859 and served as a representative until 1861. At the outbreak of the Civil War, he raised Company B of Colonel Elkanah Greer's 3rd Texas Cavalry, also known as the South Kansas Regiment. The regiment was organized in Dallas on the 13th of July in 1861. After Robert served under Benjamin McCullough in Arkansas and Missouri, he was transferred east of the Mississippi River and became part of Ross's Texas Brigade. So when the 1-year enlistment period expired on the 8th of May in 1862, new elections were held and my husband was elected colonel. So he rose through the ranks pretty quickly, but he was an intelligent man, he was hardworking, he loved God, loved his country. So it's not surprising to me that he rose that quickly. Unfortunately, my husband, my Robert, was in poor health. Now I have to tell you that during this time, conditions were not very good. The food was often poorly prepared, poorly cooked, and the water that they drank, well, that was extremely questionable. So, unfortunately, and I'm really embarrassed to say this, but my husband suffered with chronic diarrhea. He could not take command anymore. He had to resign from the regiment on the 12th of June in 1862, and he went back to Texas. In 1863, Robert was appointed major and commissary officer to General Greer. Several politicians, including the Texas congressional delegation, recommended Robert for promotion to brigadier general, but Robert was never able to take the field again. In 1864, Robert was appointed brigadier general, 4th Brigade, Texas State Troops. And after the war, Robert and I moved to Dallas, where he served as a constable. Always serving. Never stopped serving, even though he was in such poor health. Later we moved to Sulphur Springs, where he ran a grocery store. Robert died on the 19th of November in 1881. Robert was a good man. He was a brilliant man. He loved God, and he loved his country, and he loved his family. So you may be wondering if the town Cumbie was named for Robert. Well, yes it was. Cumbie is a small town in Hopkins County with roots going back to 1842. It went through several name changes before being named Cumbie. Congressman David B. Culberson, a friend to Robert, was the one that suggested the town be named for Robert, and so it became Cumbie. One of the names that Cumbie had was Blackjack Grove, and that's because it sits right by a grove of blackjack oak trees. It had that name for a long time, but Cumbie then was settled by D.W. Cole in 1842. The Blackjack Grove opened a post office in 1848 in the home of the first postmaster, John D. Matthews. During the Civil War, men from Blackjack Grove formed Company K of Colonel William B. Sims' 9th Texas Cavalry. It was at the Battle of Elkhorn that Company K was the first to plant its flag in the Union Battery. So, if you have not been to Cumbie, I urge you to visit that town. It looks so much different now. And I so appreciate, again, your willingness to come and stand. Thank you.
Oh, okay, sorry.
All right, I'm ready. I'm glad everybody's here. I'm Colonel James Weaver. I was buried here in 1898, and I was so important in the state of Texas and the South that the newspaper, the Memphis Commercial Field, wrote a obituary of me, and in that obituary they said, in every charge he was at the front, his good sword pointing at the enemy.
That's right.
Well, that was me. I was a leader, and I started this in 1861 right here in Hopkins County. I formed a cavalry unit of 150 men, and we got on our horses and we rode east to be part of the Army of the Tennessee, led by General Braxton Bragg. We fought in several important battles. We fought at Murfreesboro there in Tennessee. We fought at Missionary Ridge, which was an important battle, and then we fought at Chickamauga when we were victorious at the Battle of Chickamauga there in North Georgia. So I had quite an illustrious career and successful career as a leader of men fighting in the Civil War. So when I returned, I was so important with everybody here in Hopkins County, they elected me sheriff and tax collector. So for 6 years, back then the sheriff was the tax collector, which was true in many municipalities. So I was able to, I did that for 6 years and was quite successful in that. But I was asked to run for state representative, but I refused to do so. Before the war, I married my first wife, Sarah, who's right here, and we were probably married in the Jefferson area. My father, William, lived in Georgia. I was born in Georgia. We lived in Alabama, and then we lived in Mississippi, and I probably knew some of my family members back in Mississippi before coming to Texas. And so we got here, and I had a sister, Rena, and Rena is buried right up here, and this you could call the Rogers Weaver plot area, and the taller tombstone down there is my brother-in-law, Frank Rogers. Frank was many things here in the county. He was the county judge, and he was my business partner. We owned a mercantile business down on the square at the corner of Gilmer and Main Street. And that existed for almost 40 years. We were business partners. We started that before the Civil War, and it continued on for a number of years thereafter. My sister, his wife Rena, tombstone there, and it says 1857. And I'm proposing that that is the oldest, or if not one of the oldest, burial sites in our cemetery. And if you kind of look at the hill there, it's one of the highest spots here on the grounds. And so if you were going to be one of the first people getting buried here, not an Indian, you would want to choose the higher point of ground. So she died young, and Frank died later, and his second wife's buried about 15 foot back there behind you. My first wife died fairly young. We did have 6 children, and the youngest was named Sierra Nevada, and I'd gone to California. And so I don't know if I came back named Gold or not, but I came back with the name Sierra Nevada. I guess I love the mountains up there, and so we named our first child Sierra Nevada. My first wife died after 6 children being born. 2 daughters lived in adulthood, 1 son lived to adulthood. My second wife was my first wife's sister, so that made life pretty convenient. And I made this wonderful monument to 2 girls so that they could be here for eternity. I was the wealthiest man in Hopkins County. I owned approximately 10,000 acres. Most of it is in town here, out towards Sulphur Springs, Brinker, and what is now known as Weaver. I owned a great deal of property there and was the biggest taxpayer in the county in that period of time. So I also...
Did you collect your own taxes, Mr. Weaver?
Well, later on. Yeah. I don't think I was doing anything stolen. I was a Methodist. We wouldn't have been.
That's right.
A little more about my financial endeavor. So my 2 daughters, my 2 adult daughters, I set their husbands up in the banking business. So in 1876, shortly after all the Yankees ran out again, we started a local bank. And Sierra Nevada married Mr. Whitworth, and my other daughter married national bank, and it existed until the 30s when it became part of State Bank, which is now Alliance Bank. So I was one of the early bankers here today. Back to my good partner and brother-in-law Rogers, our mercantile store was downtown where Chris Voorhees has his Edward Jones shop. David Watson and Meyer own that building, and next door,
The Boy building? The Boy building?
yes, but I got to finish my story. And so he owned 5 buildings, brick buildings downtown, and one of them was everything unique, which my daughter and son-in-law owned. So he owned those buildings along there, and in 1895 they all burnt to the ground. I did not have any insurance, but I built them back.
All right.
Someone built them back. And they're all there today, but I had a $75,000 loss when that fire took place in 1895. And there are pictures of that building, those buildings. So that was part of my financial holdings. I had all the land, was farming, and then we formed the first railroad to come to town. My brother-in-law Frank and I were stockholders in that. One of the stops on the railroad coming to the east was the Weaver stop, which was named after me. Weaver became a bustling little town. It was a stop. Franchised Mercantile Building, we were founding members of the Masonic Lodge, which those meetings were held upstairs of our building initially. We later built a building down at the corner of Depot and Main Street. But the first Masonic Lodge was in our building, and we named it Bright Star Masonic Lodge. And it was Bright Star Masonic Lodge for about 10 years. Being a good Democrat, my brother-in-law got to be the postmaster. So in the Mercantile Building, he had the Bright Star Post Office. And he would have served under the Franklin Pierce administration and James Buchanan administration. The presidents appointed postmasters back then, and post offices were in buildings. They didn't have freestanding buildings back then. So I'm taking claim for the name Bright Star. Alright, Colonel Weaver and Frank Rogers, we were involved in a lot of downtown Sulphur Springs development, a lot of the cotton business that took place here, a lot of the farming that took place here. I had a wonderful life, took care of my family, and I donated at one time $6,000 to the Sulphur Springs schools. So that would have been a big chunk of money to help get the school started in that period of time. So not only was a wealthy person, I not only gave money to the Methodist Church, I gave it to other denominations and other organizations. So that's me, Colonel James Weaver.
Thank you.
Right.
Thank you.
Colonel Weaver.
Awesome. Thank you.
I want to welcome all of you. This is one of the grave sites of the many brave Confederates, many brave veterans of all years who were buried out here in this historic cemetery. This is H.P. Acker, my little brother. We were all born in David, Alabama. His proper name is Henderson Case.
Well, this is hold on, man. A long wheelbase. Excuse me, I'm sorry. You have to get around here. Okay, sorry.
Our grandfather, William Sutherland Acker, was a private in the War of 1812. I don't think Henderson even remembers him. He was only 4 years old. And our great-grandpa, Johannes Peter Acker, shortly after immigrating here, fought with the North Carolina Patriots in the American Revolutionary War. I think I have a picture around here I want to show you. My name is Demarius Adeline. My nickname is Addie. That's what Henderson always called me. And I'll be telling you his story today. He was only 12 when our papa, the Reverend Henry Dearborn, passed away. And we were put under the guardianship of our oldest brother, William Cox, all of his underage children. Here's his picture. It's amazing, though. William and Henderson look so much alike they could be twins. So you'll be able to get an idea of what the man looks like. Sorry, all this blew away a minute ago. Henderson was 16 years old when Alabama seceded from the Union to become a part of the Confederate States of America. Recruiters were everywhere trying to get young men and old to volunteer, even though they knew this was we would be the low man on the totem pole. A few months later, March the 15th, 1844, Henderson enlisted in the 25th Alabama Regiment. He and all the other men in town were very confident of victory over the, excuse my language, the damn Yankees. Very early in the war, he was captured by Union forces and imprisoned at Camp Morton, Indiana. In our morning prayers, we fervently prayed for him and all our men. We wrote letters, but we seldom got a reply. remained a private during the entire war. He was in the Battle of Pittsburgh Landing, Corinth, Bardstown, Murfreesboro, Chickamauga, Missionary Ridge, Resaca, Georgia, New Hope Church, where he was captured again and remained in prison until the surrender. When we saw him coming back, he had the look of a defeated man, not the hopeful young man that rode away. This is a picture of the surrender. After the 4 long years, over 650,000 deaths. On the 18th of April, 1865, our brave General Lee surrendered to General Grant. All the prisoners were released and returned home, but only 1 in 4 had survived. More had died from disease than from battle. 1 in 13 came home with amputations, and then the rest had died. He was not the optimistic young boy, but now a picture of a defeated man. But life goes on. When he was 23, he married his sweetheart, Nancy Brown Gibson. After a few years, they decided to pack up everything and head for Texas. They stopped a few places before coming to Sulphur Springs, Texas. And this was so ironic because Henderson had cousins who lived in Sulphur Springs, Alabama. One of the first things they did was to join the First Baptist Church. I know this would make our papa so happy. Let's see, I think I have some of those newspaper articles over here. May the 3rd, 1872, Henderson and Nancy announced the birth of beautiful little Araola. Henderson was so happy. He wrote a letter to tell us of the blessed event, and I still carry that in my purse. He idolized his tiny little daughter. They dressed her in the sweetest little outfits, and Henderson would kiss her and tell her she was so beautiful. A few months passed. We now had a telephone, and it was seldom a long-distance call. Very frail and only lived 8 months. We never even got to see a picture of our sweet little niece. She is buried right here in the family plot. And this was such heartbreaking news, even more so when the doctor told Nancy that she would never be able to give birth again. Henderson had always assumed he would have many children, including a son to carry on the family name, but now the family would include him. He continued his work and now was a grocer in his business on the square. His beloved wife Nancy was just 57 years old when she passed away. She is laid here next to her precious daughter, Nanny Barrett. A few years later, Henderson married the widow Dora McBride. She passed away February the 27th. For the obituary, and I want to read part of it. It's long, so I won't read it all. It's in the paper that day. Death entered the home of H.P. Acker and took from him his beloved companion, Mrs. Dora Acker. She was born on March 7th in Hopkins County. She spent her years teaching and had a share of a very hard life. She was left alone in the world when her parents died. But she was so happy a few years ago when she married H.P. Acker, who survives her. Oh, this was the new car back in 1912. Henderson had just bought a new one. He'd been out for a ride throughout the town on his new automobile. I think he was showing it off to the city. A Upon return to his home, he stepped in the door and suddenly died. I was mailed this newspaper with his obituary. Death of H.P. Hacker, pioneer citizen of Sulphur Springs, dies suddenly. H.P. died suddenly last Saturday evening, shortly after 3 o'clock, in his home on Church Street, presumably of heart trouble. He'd been out riding in his auto. Just a few minutes before, he was found dead in his chair by the phone. The telephone receiver being down indicated he was in the act of using the instrument as the summons of death came. He was 70 years old, born in Talladega County, Alabama, and grew to manhood. Moved to Texas in the late 60s and located in Sulphur Springs in 1870. For many years, he was engaged in the mercantile business in this city. He stood as one of the most foremost and substantial men. A straightforward dealing, he merited and won the confidence of our people. And during his business career, accumulated an abundant competence for his declining years. He'd been a faithful member of the Baptist Church since 1870 and a member of the Odd Fellows Lodge, and was ever true and loyal to the tenets of this great fraternity. In the passing of H.P. Acker, we feel Sulphur Springs has lost one of her best citizens. As a man, he stood for higher and better things, and doubtless left his impress for good. He was unassuming and plain-spoken, but as a friend, he was always true. And as a Christian, he was faithful to the end. Funeral services were conducted at the Baptist Church Monday 3 o'clock, and the burial occurred at 6th Cemetery at 4 o'clock, to the direction of the Odd Fellows Lodge, an institution which he helped to bank and maintain in Sulphur Springs, which he took an active interest in their cause from the walks of man. The Sulphur Springs Gazette extends its sympathies to all whose hearts are saddened by his passing. That's his story.
Thank you.
What is the elephant book here?
Oh, forgot that part. When the baby was born, it was some of her saying it was some of his old books that we had planned to send to her shortly when she would and we could read it to her. I really don't know that we had those old books. Didn't have time to research that.
Makes a good story.
Thank you.
Okay, we're going.
Well, y'all, I'm glad to see you.
Okay,
It's usually dead silent around here. That's how talking goes on. I get pretty bored. But
where is the last?
I am
Over.
I'm on the
over
roof.
behind that
Rooster
bar.
Scarborough
See the
Owen.
top of the flag?
Now, I'll tell you right off, most people that's heard of me know heard of Alma Owen. Lived out on Conley Street. But I'm going to go back and tell you the story from a little earlier point of view. Now, you know, people thought I moved to Sulphur Springs because I really liked it. The truth was, my grandmother was from Como. My mother was from Como, and I used to come back and visit my grandparents. I was born in 1922 in Arkansas. Even though my mother was from Hopkins County, when she got married, she moved up to Arkansas, and my father, Walter Brewster, raised me there. That's where he was from, so he raised me there. That's where I went to school. And when I was grown, I went to Arkansas A&M. Now let me tell you, I've heard some Texans mention that y'all have an A&M around here. Well, I'll tell you, my football team couldn't beat your football team. Oh, that's pretty bad. Well, my education in 1940s when I started college, but my education was interrupted when World War II started. And I went to Washington, D.C. in the war effort, and I worked there until the war was over. But when the war was over, I remained in civil service, and I went down to Shoemaker Naval Ammunition Depot. I worked in the administration. They thought it was too much of a firecracker to get to work in the warehouse. They really treated me pretty good, but I worked there for a while. And that's where I met my first husband, Oscar Scarborough. He was a lieutenant in the Navy. We got married in 1952. Marriage was really happy, but he died in 1958. When he died, I went back into civil service, went on up to Iowa. It was Indiana, that's where it was. I went back up to Indiana and worked at another naval depot, ammunition depot. I didn't work there very long, because there was an opening at NASA. And in the early 1960s, I went to NASA, worked in the administration, rubbed shoulders with a lot of the astronauts. I worked on the Mercury and the Gemini and the Apollo program. Worked there, and that's where I met my last husband. Well, let me tell you a little bit about him. He went into the Army. He was a colonel in the Army, Army surgeons. And he worked from 1939 to 1969 for the Army. Well, in 1969, he retired from the Army and went to NASA. And that's where we met. His name was Connor Cannon Armstrong, of course, Owen. Cannon Armstrong Owen. And he was head of the pulmonary lab there at NASA. We worked there together. But, you know, NASA is very much a family. Everybody is very close there, so you get to know just about everybody. And we worked there until 1980, and both of us retired the same year. We came back to Sulphur Springs to get married in 1980, and we lived on Connolly Street. Well, in 1981, they started the NASA program. Started the shuttle program. I never got to work with the shuttle, though. Now, my husband would tell me, he says, you know, you're the sweetest woman I know, but you're also the meanest I ever met. He says, you're as mean as they get when you know something needs to be done and somebody's not doing it. And so he said, you know, you got a good side, you got a bad side. I'm glad I got the good one. So, yeah, I guess that's about all I know to tell you. If you got any questions, I might try to answer them. Oh, by the way, excuse me being overdressed. When I was on my deathbed, they said, do you want to be resuscitated? And I said, don't you wake me up unless there's a party. And so I figured if they woke me up for today, I was definitely going to a party. So I wore my party best.
What was your job at NASA?
I was in the administration. Managed, there were a lot of files that every single astronaut, whether they ever fly or not, you've got every kind of file that needs to be done, whether their health, where they live, you know, anything about them, any doctor's report. So I was in charge of seeing that everything was kept and their file was up to date, no mistakes in there. That's what I did most of the time.
They lived in the Howard Hicks house on Conley Street, didn't they?
That's exactly right.
Which one?
If you were at the Howard hit the red brick house, if you were on my tour yesterday, it's the red brick house on the corner of Locust and Conley Street.
Amazing as they
And anybody that's said, well, I know who Emma Owen is, I just don't know any of the rest of those people. They didn't know, I'm Alma Owen. Alma Owen. They didn't know any of the Scarboroughs or the Brewsters. They didn't know any of those people, just her.
She's kin to the Carrolls, though.
Okay.
Yeah.
The Carrolls from Mount Como?
Yeah.
Her mother was Watley.
Yeah, but she's kin to the Carrolls, too.
Okay. Live and learn.
Well, thank you very much.
Well, I want y'all to be able to see his stone, but you can't. It's tipping back this way. Leo Luther St. Clair. SKC is a Navy term for storekeeper, chief petty officer. U.S. Navy, World War I, II, and Korea.
Oh, wow.
And he lived to be almost 90 years old.
Leo's name on that big stuff.
3
He and
wars.
his sister are buried here.
Wow.
Tell the story.
Yeah.
This is a report for WBFR Radio. I'm Enola Gay. In honor of the life of one of our nation's heroes, this individual continued serving his community in a very unique way during the years between and after his military service. Leo Luther St. Clair of Hopkins County, Texas was a veteran of 3 wars, the between the years of 1917 and the 50s, from his teens until his 50s. And under this simple marker lies a man who, when not on active duty, worked at a unique artistic interest by which he lives on in our memory. Little has survived about St. Clair's wartime experience, and little is written about his secular life, except that he was initially a storekeeper. He had a passion for art and design, and that served him well during his professional career in department stores and window design. But before that, at age 19, a circumstance handed him an unusual gift, and he developed that gift into a hobby that delights and edifies people today. As a bit of background, St. Clair was born prior to the First World War and grew up in the settlement of Sulphur Bluff. His family were among the pioneers who cleared land and paved a path for civilization. His father purchased and operated a store at least 2 different times, helping provide the essentials of life to a community often cut off from supplies due to floods, rivers, fallen timber, and other obstacles. His father's occupation, as would be Leo's in the 1910 census, was storekeeper, and his Navy rank was storekeeper chief petty officer. Apparently, the St. Clairs were readers and valued education. Leo's sister Gladys, who is here, earned a master's degree in college with her thesis ambitiously named The History of Hopkins County. This compilation of letters and interviews from small communities of the county between 1905 and the 1930s is still used as a reference work in the Hopkins County Genealogical Society's library. One of Leo's brothers gave an interview about Sulphur Bluff included in the archives of the Texas Almanac. Another brother became a prominent businessman in Mount Vernon, and his parents had many friends. Leo, however, was a soldier and a traveler and a lifetime collector. Never historical works of art, which today are housed in Sulphur Springs, about 24 at a time of his music boxes, which at one time was the largest collection in the world. They're rotated into display in specially designed cabinets inside the Sulphur Springs Public Library. Many of the pieces are over 120 years old and fragile. The collection is free to be viewed by everyone. Sadly, the unique music and sound of these elaborate sculptures cannot be heard today due to their delicate age, but many adults remember hearing them when they were school children visiting in the old public library. St. Clair got his first music box by accident. In his assignment as storekeeper aboard the USS George Washington, he was charged with overseeing the 42 pieces of luggage belonging to the King and Queen of Belgium on their U.S. state visit. When one of the suitcases fell, St. Clair heard the melodious sound of applause of music from within. He reported the incident, adding that it reminded him of his grandmother's box back in Texas. And at the end of the journey, he was presented with the box in the form of a miniature chair playing a tune from the opera Faust. From there, his collection grew to over 200 music boxes, many as gifts from people he met in many countries of the world. Why are music boxes important? An art form in itself, a music box could serve as a form of entertainment for those who enjoyed classical music and folk music, to break the silence of their quiet hours, possibly by candlelight or oil lamp. The boxes were sculptures themselves of beautiful art representing many cultures, with inside a musical works of Swiss or Japanese construction. Music was produced by winding up a cylinder which would play a single tune or a number of tunes. A music box that worked when a koan was inserted became the precursor of the jukebox. These beloved boxes, which might be in the physical form of a bird or animal or barn or cross or any object that can be imagined, played a role in the evolution of recorded sound, which later led to radio and to the evolving music industry. So the humble music box became the forerunner in a multi-million-dollar music industry that continues to develop today. Rutgers University of Camden, New Jersey has a collection of elaborate music boxes in the Stedman Gallery, said to resemble an abundantly filled Victorian parlor. We must believe that Chief Petty Officer Leo St. Clair was captivated by this art form, brought it back to his home community for the enjoyment of others. It is the hope that we at WBFR Radio, that you will one day get to hear the music he enjoyed and experience part or all of the Leo St. Clair Music Box collection, gathered largely during his military service years. From WBFR, thank you for listening.
Oh, that was great. That was lovely.
Yeah.
He left out one of his sisters, his other sister, Minnie Sellers.
I know his sister married somebody important.
Dr. Odd Sellers.
Huh, I wonder who that is.
Thank you very much. This was
Somebody's
fun.
been working on this house.
Yeah.